So when we first import data, we want to try and get a broad understanding of the type of data we're working with, what the data consists of, and the dimensions of the data. So if we pull up this data into a new tab, and we take a look at the information in the global environment, we see we have 159 observations across 6 variables. So this is a sample from a data set that examined the construct of self-evaluation during music students' practice sessions. So Q30 represents the years participating in private music lessons. Q9 represents the child's age. Q7 represents the child's musical instrument. So those 3 are our demographic variables. We also have 3 variables that take the form of Likert type responses. In particular, it was a 4-point Likert type response structure where respondents responded either strongly disagree, disagree, agree, or strongly agree. So the item prompt for Q16 was I ask for help when I do not understand something I am practicing. The item prompt for Q17 was I enjoy receiving help on how to improve my practice routine. And the item prompt for item Q18 was I notice my improvements when I practice. So note here in the global environment, we can click on this blue arrow and it'll give us some more information. So note that through the data import, all of the variables within this data frame were imported as character vectors. We know that because of the CHR. Now keep in mind that with different iterations and different versions of R, sometimes data is going to be coerced in different ways. In this particular case, they were all coerced as character vectors. So when we first import our data and we want to understand the landscape of the data, there are a few things that we can take a look at. So the first thing we want to do is make sure that the data was imported as a data frame. We could do this by using the class function and passing in the object containing the data set. And we see the class of the object is a data frame. Again, the global environment tells us the dimensions of our data frame, 159 observations across 6 variables. If we want to do that in the code, we can use the dim function. And we see that we have 159 observations across 6 variables. We can examine the number of observations or the number of rows using the nrow function. And we can examine the number of variables or the number of columns using the ncol function. We can isolate each of the names of the variables using the names function. And we can examine the structure of the dataset using the str function. Notice here that the structure function is the same as the data we see when we click on this blue arrow. Now, if we want to examine just the first few rows of the dataset, we can use the head function. So we see down here, using the head function, we see all of the data in the first 6 rows of the dataset. So the default is 6. However, we can take a look at as many rows as we want by adding that argument. So let's say we want to take a look at the first 10 rows. We can simply add 10. Similarly, we can take a look at the last few rows by using the tail function. Again, by default, we'll see the last 6 rows, and we can always change that. If we want to take a look at maybe the last 12 rows, we can specify the number 12. Now, if we want to access any of the individual variables within the data frame, we can use the $sign notation. So if we take a look at the structure here in the global environment, we see SE1, which is the object the data frame is stored in. We have a $sign notation and then the name of the variable. So if we want to access that variable, we can type in the object, use the $sign notation, and then we can choose whatever variable we want. So if we take a look at Q30, we see all of the data for the variable titled Q30. So now one thing to note is that within our working memory, only the data frame is recognized. Any of the variables stored within the data frame itself are not recognized. So in other words, if we want to take a look at the variable Q7, we get an error. Because what we have to do is always call the data frame first and then call on that variable using the $sign notation. So one shortcut that we can use to eliminate this step and to be able to have access to the contents of the data frame without using the $sign notation is we can use the attach function. And we'll attach the object SE1. Now, we can take a look at just Q7 and we get all of the data associated with Q7. So this might be a good solution if we're only working with one data frame. However, when we're working with multiple data frames stored in multiple objects, it can get rather confusing. So best practice is to really work with the $sign notation. So we can detach this using the detach function. And now again, if we try and access Q7, it'll give us the error again.